This is the Editor's Half Hour. Step into the life of an editor for 30 minutes as we discuss the craft of editing, industry trends, and editorial resources. Your host is co-founder and CEO of Peak Publishing Inc., Nadia Jaja Pupa. She is experienced in all facets of the publishing industry, from editing to design, and works with corporate clients and self-published authors. Nadia and her guests are about to share powerful insights and stories on what it takes to be an editor. And this is your host, Nadia Jaja Pupa.
Welcome, listeners. In this episode, we're stepping into the world of interactive storytelling with game editor and narrative designer Jess Haskins. She is the founder of The Game Editors, which is a boutique studio specializing in narrative consulting, editing for games, and voiceover production. She also teaches game design at NYU Game Center and has worked on a variety of award-winning indie games. How I found you, Jess, was I think it was through your community organizing. You're supporting so much in the game industry and in the indie scene. And I think I just stumbled upon something that you were leading in New York. And I thought, what a great episode. We've got to cover video game editing. So welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you, Jess. Please share with the listeners the things that you do, the types of games you work on.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I love going on about games and game editing to whoever will listen. So I basically started a business editing games because I kind of saw a need. It was kind of the two skills that I did. So I just kind of crammed them together. The games I work on tend to be small-scale indie games, often by a single developer or a very small team, kind of narrative-focused, a lot of dialogue, like adventure games are kind of a genre that I work in a bunch. And I also co-write games with my partner, who is one of those solo adventure game developers. So I've worked with him on his games, like Lamplight City, Rosewater, the game that people may have heard of recently that I've worked on. That's kind of the biggest one is Titanium Court, which won the IGF Grand Prize and a couple others just a little while ago. And that's been something people finally can get their hands on and play and have been talking about. So that was a really fun one. But I've done everything from strategy games to like idle clicker games to educational RPGs. I do non-digital games, rule books for tabletop games, so kind of really a variety of things. But those indie narrative games are kind of what I love to work on the most.
Oh, that is so much fun. I just remember when I found, I think I had seen something about some gathering or something that you were leading. And I thought, that is so interesting. I am so outside of this world. So I feel that I need to apologize to the listeners because I'm just not in the gamer community as much. You know, when I was younger, before I had kids, I would play games, but I'm a little bit ignorant, I guess, is where I'm coming at. But it doesn't stop me from bringing Jess on the podcast. And I think Jess is so gracious to spend your time. I know you're so busy, but being on the podcast to shed some light on what it takes. So I have 1,000 questions, but I do want to share that when we met one-on-one, I was so hesitant to ask you this. And I remember just like thinking to myself, you know what? I can tell that Jess is super cool and she's not going to judge me. But I remember asking you, like, what are you editing? Are you editing in a Word doc? I think that was one of those questions that I just felt like an idiot asking. But then you made me feel so much less ignorant because you were like, that actually is a good question, because there's so many different varying levels when it comes to video game, because in my mind goes straight to dialogue, right? But there's other things too, like there's got to be user interface stuff, like buttons that players are clicking, so many different things, and how do they exist? How do you approach that as an editor? So let's just start there, like setting the scope of what you're working with and how you're working, and then we'll just continue to dive deeper.
Sure. That's the thing about games, and that makes them so so interesting, but also challenging and different from other media. I mean, people still say like, "Oh, games are such a young medium." I mean, we've been around for a while. I don't know if that still holds any weight, but I mean, you think about
Right.
like films, like, making a feature film, they're pretty much, there's a very set way of how they're made, how they're produced, all the roles, all the titles, what kind of software tools, techniques you use.
Mm-hmm.
In games, it's like you're not only making the content and what you're going to say and create and put out there, but also inventing the medium every single time. And there's very little standardization just within the industry, not just for editing, but anything like, design tools, programming, like it's all very, very influx and informalized. So there is no one editing process in games. There's no one writing process in games. There are some common tools, but there are no standards. A lot of times I am working in a spreadsheet. That's kind of what has become, like game writers get used to writing in spreadsheets. They don't always like it very much. Editor, I work with the spreadsheet, but I also have worked with, sometimes we get the script written in like a screenplay or like manuscript form before it gets implemented. That's kind of the
Okay.
process that my partner and I use when we work on games. Some people use specialized software. There's things like Ink or software called Artisy Draft or Twine, like all these different formats that manage like branching text and conditionals. So you really kind of have to be prepared for everything, but
Yeah.
also be prepared to see a lot of spreadsheets.
I love it. I think that helps give us a center of, what it is that you're working on and what does that look like for you. So I tried my best to do some reading up on what it's like on the back end, behind the scenes of putting a game together. And I started coming across terms like, there's the indie games that you like. That's like your thing, right? Then there's, I saw terms like double A or triple A games. So what is that? What can you describe what that means so we can understand the hierarchy or whatever you want to call it in that world?
Yeah, so a AAA game is, what most people might think of when they think of video games, like the big budget blockbusters, the Call of Duty, the Madden, like Zelda, like, big console games or PC games that tend to have these massive budgets, huge teams. And I don't know, I don't think I've ever worked on anything approaching that. I've maybe gone into the AA range, which is sort of the mid-range studio. And these terms are also very squishy too. AAA is what you'll hear about the most, and then indie, which is sort of this contested site of, well, what is indie really? Like, if you have a publisher, are you indie? If you have a budget over X dollars, are you indie? Like, if you have outside funding, are you indie? But those are the two ends that people tend to talk about. And then AA is for everything sort of in between, mid-size. And, the thing about indie that draws me is not necessarily like team size or the budget, but just the intent and like the kinds of projects. For me, I approach games as an art form, and I'm interested in them as literature and as, these expressive experiences. And that tends to be where people are making things motivated by what they want to express, an idea that they have, something that they want to get out there, a story that they want to tell. So that's where I tend to wind up working, because that's what draws
Yeah.
me.
And it sounds like, at least in editor terms, when we think about like the big five, right? Like the big five publishers working for a publishing company versus working with like an indie author. And most of the editors I meet, they do both, but the ones who are just so into it are like, they love the indie authors, or the ones that like to work as a book coach. And that's higher level, working collaboratively with the author. So there's, like there are varying levels there. There must be varying levels in working in video games. So there's, I want to just talk about those roles a little bit. And it's making me think back to an episode where we covered comic book editing or comic book proofreading. There are so many different people who are part of that process. So we have a video game writer, right? You might be working, I don't know, collaboratively or at least in communication with, in some way, shape, or form, a writer or writer team, maybe a narrative designer, and then you are the editor, right? So, let's just define a little bit of what those roles are so that anybody listening is like, whatever you share is going to be enlightening because it's just so unique to what we do.
Yeah, and again, this is something that we're, editors working in the industry, we're kind of figuring out for ourselves, again, because they aren't formalized or because we have, we might have a title that doesn't even have editor in it, like narrative consultant or like dialogue designer or localization QA. But
Wow.
these are all kind of editors in some form. So even just like getting together with other editors to say like, hey, what's your title? What kind of work do you do? What parts of the process do you work on? What's your workflow? We're finding similarities and differences. So one way that I try to make sense of it is by comparing it to those more like standardized processes from traditional media. So in the early stages, you might have something sort of akin to a developmental edit, which tends to be what I would call a narrative consult, or some people call it a narrative edit. And that's really just helping shape usually the narrative aspect, or it could just be how the game is told, making sure the message is getting across, providing feedback, reorganizing things, not necessarily like copy editing words. But the phase that I work on more often is that latter half, which is more akin to a line edit or a copy edit, where I'm then taking the near final draft of the script and actually revising for flow, especially if it's dialogue. Is it something that an actor can read and get out right on the first take, or do they stumble all over it because it's never been designed to be said aloud? Or looking at like
Oh.
UI terms, like are we using consistent terms for talking about the interface and how we interact with things? Does it say click? Does it say tap? Does it say, touch, drag? Are we accounting for different, like, oh, is this going to be available on mobile too? Well, then we have to be able to catch, like, don't say click. It has to be able to say tap if you're on mobile, things like that.
Wow.
Are we using what kind of world is this? Like anything like you do for a fiction copy edit, like keeping a style sheet that's going to keep track of like, here are the names of the factions and here how we like capitalize these elements in this invented world. And here's the details that we need to know and like use the same terms to refer to them. So that tends to fall into the line editing and copy editing work that I do, which occurs near the end of a project.
Okay. So just listening to you talk, I have 3 questions and I'm going to try my best to think about where we want to go. So you brought up, let's start with UI. So UI is user interface. Did you have to take courses or do you have a specialization in UI writing? Because that in and of itself is fascinating to me. Because I want to know how much of that comes into play on the editorial side. Because you're, like you mentioned, working on a device that's mobile versus like tap, click, whatever. Those are nuanced there. So I'm curious to hear what your take is on UI and where you have a say, if you do have a say.
Yeah, so I never studied UI specifically, but it kind of came up as part of my overall game design education. I was working as an editor and a proofreader before I went to go and study game design in grad school to become a game designer, and ended up with a particular interest in narrative design and interactive storytelling. But that was kind of where I got all of my game grounding, including, we built projects, I'm no programmer, but I can hack something together to make a prototype or something at least. So we kind of got hands-on all parts of the process, and thought about interaction, user experience, onboarding, tutorialization? Are we teaching them what they need to know? All those kinds of things. So I kind of combine that with, my editing background, and it all comes into play. I think that a huge part of editing is just empathy for the reader or user. And that's
Right.
such an important part of being a game designer, is being able to anticipate how the player is going to come to the game, how the game is going to teach them what they need to know to succeed at the game. So there's is kind of like a shading into like playtesting, or empathy for the user or the editor, as putting themselves in the mind of the player and saying like, I think they might get confused here because in the tutorial you called this thing this, but then you use this term, like what is its actual name?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so, it's so fascinating to me because something you just said made me think about the fact that as editors, editing a book, we understand what that process is, and whatever production it needs to go through is so much simpler than what a video game would need to go through. And so, like you said, you're thinking of the user experience, the user, the player, not so much a reader. And so editors think of what is that reader going to experience as they go through a book, whether they take into account the page layout, design, if there's a book with infographics. And it's similar. I mean, it's so similar. It's just that the you're interacting in a very immersive world that you're being thrown into. So how does that differ? I mean, there's obviously there's that obvious difference. Obviously, the medium is a book and versus a, interactive game. But give us an example of something that you're like, oh, that might confuse the user in the game, where you're like, oh, this is an edit, or something that you said that was so beneficial for the game. I don't know if you can think of anything.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing that comes to mind is not a video game, but a tabletop game that I worked
Oh,
on
okay.
recently. Editing the rule book for what I would describe as a very crunchy Euro style tabletop board game. One of the ones that covers the biggest table that you have in your house, and has
Wow.
like loads of little pieces, and it had a like 80-page rule book. And the difference with
Wow.
those is that, unlike a video game, you don't just sit down and play it, but you kind of have to understand the system in order to be able to set it up and play it and enforce the rules yourself.
Right.
So, as again, studying as a game designer, like writing rules was a sort of like particular craft that we studied, like how to do that efficiently, how to organize the information, how to not overwhelm players. And yeah, so editing that was first wrapping my head around how this very complicated game actually worked. And
Yeah.
then, because I was coming to it as someone unfamiliar with the game. And so it's like, all right, so this is the information I have. Can I figure out, not only like what's the story and what's the goal and what's happening here, but like the technical information of like very logical like rules. It's just almost like programming in a sense, only you're programming what the player is going to do. So it's like a very kind of like precise language.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting project that kind of like stretched some different parts of my brain that
Oh,
maybe
I
I don't
love
get to
it.
use so much when I'm just like, copy editing some dialogue to, make sure
I
that
love
it's
that.
communicating information to the player and not boring them and not making them want to like hit the skip cutscene button to get on to the other parts.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's so interesting to me. So what is it, how does that translate to the editorial process? Like, what do you, I know at least with like the tabletop games, those, and we had an editor who, Rachel Lapido, actually was a previous guest and covered just the tabletop role playing games. And she was talking about how intense those style sheets can be. Is that similar for video games? Or is it more of a design style guide, or what is it that you use as your source for rules, because editors love rules, that we thrive in a rule driven environment. I mean, that's how we work. That's how our brains work. So what's that like for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there is something about that combination of like games and systems and editing that is appealing to me for sure. It really depends on the project and what sort of like the client has and is ready to share. I usually ask for, just give me any and all material that you can, like give me your world building, your design docs, give me playthrough videos, give me the explainer videos where someone is walking through the game and talking about what's going on. Give me a key so I can play it.
Cool.
And then usually what I end up doing for the most typical kind of copy edit I do is I will create a style sheet for the project, which is, before I started editing games and creating them, I don't remember ever seeing a document like that on a project necessarily. Like there were all kinds of like game design documents that might record terms and stuff, but like the editorial style sheet, like you might be familiar from, like for a fantasy novel series or something in like traditional media. I'd never seen that before. And usually I and my associate editor, who happens to be my mother, we're a family business.
I love it.
Who's the proofreader who comes after me. She might be the only other
Okay.
one that ever looks at it.
Okay.
If it's being localized, the other translators who are doing localizations might look at it after. But I would love to see it more common in games. I'd love to see like every project start one of those like during the writing phase, ideally.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
think for most games, like most people aren't ever used to hearing the words style guide. Like
Style guide,
I use
yeah.
Chicago because I like it, and I think of games as analogous to books and literature. So it just seemed like a natural fit. But again, I'd never like worked on another game where I didn't bring it in. That's like, hey, this is our video game, and here's the script, and we use Chicago as our style. Like that's just not a thing
Yeah.
that you hear.
Yeah.
But so
Interesting.
that's what I produce while I'm working on a project, mainly again for me and my team, but also for the developers to use and for anyone else who wants to know, like, hey, like, how do we show emphasis in dialogue, or what kind of formatting tags do we use? Like, do we have access to italic text? Like, how the heck do we write dashes? Like, does our font support an M dash? Do we have to use some weird combination of hyphens cobbled together? Like,
God.
these are kind of the questions that no one has asked before I sit down to a project and try and corral it all into something that makes sense.
Oh my God. Oh, that is so interesting to me. Okay, so now you're getting me thinking about, I guess, timeline. So at what point are you brought into the project? Because you mentioned that you get to see the screens, and so you get to at least interact with in some way, shape or form. So at what phase in the project are you brought into, or are you at the very beginning? I mean, I'm so interested in when you get to be a part of this.
Yeah, for the copy edit that I do, that's usually near the end as it's nearing production and getting into pre-production.
Okay.
So there is a phase called text lock, and
Okay.
I guess technically that should come after editing. I've started to try introducing a new term of my own devising because again, none of these things have official names because everyone's making it
Yeah.
up as they go along. But I'll call it text content lock, where you have you're not adding any new scenes or any new lines other than to like, oh whoops, we figured out that like people get lost here, so we had to add an extra tutorial line. Like little additional things can sneak in, but for the most part you have you're done writing content, but it's not text locked because now it's going to be edited and I'm going to make changes. And then
I
when you
love
have
this.
actual text lock, that should come at the end of the editing and before you go on and do the other steps that require the text to be as complete as it can, like voice recording or localization.
Okay.
So sometimes people will, I mean, of course, the schedules get pretty squishy and it gets a little hairy free sometimes, so they might have already passed it on to localization for what they usually call a proofread, because in editing we know that clients are often liable to describe all kinds of editing services under the bucket of proofread.
Proofreading,
just
yeah.
So that's all.
Oh,
But
that's interesting.
ideally, you would want to be giving the translators the final locked, edited English text to then go and work off of. And, I have heard from them, they're like, yes, it makes it so much easier if the text has been edited before we go and try and work on it.
Right.
So yeah, ideally as you would bring me on as you were approaching and had your date for that text content lock, and then have allotted a nice reasonable span of time for editing, and then have text lock at the end of that, and then everything else afterward.
Text lock. Okay. These are all such new concepts for me, and I don't know why it just makes me very giddy because it's so outside of what I work on. I love it. Okay, so I still have so many questions for you, Jess, but I'm curious to know. Oh God, I'm so sad because we have to wrap up this interview, and I don't want to. But the good news is we will have an exclusive interview, and in that portion, I do want to get into your professional journey, how you got into this. We'll dive deeper into that. But I did see somewhere, probably on socials at one point, that you had said 2026 is the year for the video game editor. And I love that you said that. So please explain why and share, your insights into what you see for the future of video games. And then also how editors who have been editing, for me, I've been editing books, corporate documents for over 20 years. And I am so intrigued by this. Is it too late for me to get into it? How can someone get into this stuff? I wish I could just be like a fly on the wall or job shadow you and just see what you work on. But yeah, let's talk about the industry and your outlook for the future.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked me that. I think that this is something that has kind of been a long time coming, but it seems like this is a year where just conversations are coalescing and things are lining up to basically advocate for the role and importance of editors in games. As of fairly recently in game history, we were even still arguing for giving writers importance in games. Don't bring them on in the last second. Have a writer write your game. Novel concept. Just because of the way it kind of comes from software development and not from traditional media, there's just not that tradition of editing the way we might be used to in other media. So this is really kind of about just getting the message out there about why you might want to have an editor for your game, why it results in more enjoyable, more polished, more high quality, just better games, and how to work with an editor, having more people identify the editing roles that they do in games and just be more visible and having more of a community. So I'm this year founding a new networking group called the Game Editorial Network that is meant to be that place for editorial professionals, people in these support roles of all kinds, to come together, learn from each other, share professional development resources, and also just be visible editors in games. And through things like doing podcast interviews or giving talks or starting these groups, there's just kind of, editors being celebrated on stage at the IGF Awards. It just seems like this is the year that it's kind of all coming together, and that makes it a great time to get into game editing if that's something you're interested in. We're open to anyone who's looking to, pick up new skills or change careers or just explore this world. Kind of everyone's welcome. So that's at gameeditorial.net. Hopefully that will be launched by the time this goes out. I'm working on the website in the other window, as we speak. It's a really exciting time.
I love it. I will put links in the show notes, and at the very least, I'll have our listeners find you on LinkedIn and on all of your socials. So you can, when you make announcements for things, they'll be able to follow you. But I can't thank you enough, Jess. This is amazing. I love that you're opening up a door for editors who might be interested. And I do truly feel that you are making it seem more within reach. And I think conversations like this make it feel more within reach. I'm like, I can be the sacrificial idiot asking the dumb questions because, I want to learn more. And I think that's where it's at, is having that curiosity, genuine curiosity to learn something new. And so I think by just hearing you talk about it, it sounds like you're open to allowing editors to join your network who may not have experience, but are there to learn and absorb knowledge from other editors there. So it's just sounds like it'll be a wonderful exchange, a wonderful community. So again, thank you so much for your time. And I am excited to learn even more about some fun stories, some details about your journey. So if you'd like to get access to the exclusive interview, please join my Patreon. You can join as a sneak quote unquote peek, PIQUE, sneak peek supporter for $5 a month. You get access to exclusive interviews with all of my guests. And if you join, any time of the year, you just email me directly and I'll get you links to previous episodes. So thank you again, Jess. We are going to continue this in a few more minutes.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to the Editor's Half Hour. This podcast is your go-to resource for editorial trends, opening the discussion for new ideas through the real-life stories of editors. For more information about Nadia Jaja Pupa and her business, visit peakpublishing.com. That's PIQUE publishing.com. And remember to subscribe and follow the Editor's Half Hour wherever you get your podcasts.